Hi everyone, this is Mr. Glazer. We're going to be talking about the progressives today. So, this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Remember last time we talked about this group of farmers called the Populists who were being abused by the railroad industry and weren't being helped, and they decided to create their own third party. This third party had all these ideas, but because they were a third party, they really didn't have any chance to succeed and they failed. But their ideas went to the progressives. So let's look at who the progressives are. So the progressives are a group of people that want the government to step in and reform things, fix things that were evident from the Gilded Age. Lots of problems that were in society, and there's a lot of those problems. They're not going to be like the populists, though. They're going to take some of their ideas, but they're not these lower class farmers. Instead, they have jobs like teachers, like writers and authors, people that write these books and articles, reporters, journalists, lawyers. So they're what we call middle class. They're not poor, they're not super rich. They're educated people that want to make a change in society. They're not doing terribly, but they see that some people are and they want to make society better. Remember, they get a few specific ideas from the populists. The populists wanted to create something called an income tax, which we have today, which is just a tax on how much money we make. So if you have a job, when you get a job, you'll notice that taxes are taken out, extra money's taken out and given to the government. The populists wanted this tax to be based on how much money you made. If you made a lot of money, you paid more taxes. If you didn't make that much money, you don't pay very many taxes. They thought this would make things more equitable, more fair, more equal. So they take this idea from the populists and they're actually successful with it. We'll see later on that it actually becomes our 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which is why today we pay income taxes. They also are going to be successful in creating another amendment, the 17th Amendment, which is from another idea that the populists had, which was to have people directly elect their senators, have people themselves vote for who they want representing them. Remember, senators help create laws in Congress. So before, they were chosen by the state legislature, the state government, which presented all sorts of problems like corruption, and the populists wanted to get rid of this corruption. So the progressives, these more educated middle class people, are actually successful in turning that idea that the populists had into an amendment to the United States Constitution. So just to sum up, remember, these are people that saw lots of problems of the Gilded Age. They're middle class, and they want to reform or fix these problems. Now let's look where the progressives came from. Here's a little tree. Our tree is going to represent these progressives. What created the progressives? What shaped their worldview? What made them into what they are and helped them be successful? So just remember, they're middle class, they're teachers, they're lawyers, they're writers, they're reporters, all that good stuff. But they're going to have a few specific things that make them into what they are. Again, what we just talked about, they are heavily influenced by the Populist Party. A lot of their ideas, things like the income taxes, the direct election of senators, and another one that we didn't mention since last time, which was the secret ballot, the ability for people to vote secretly so people couldn't retaliate or intimidate you for voting the wrong way. Another thing that helped create the progressives was a movement called the social gospel movement. This was a religious movement, a moral movement that believed it was people's Christian duty to go out and help improve society, help the poor, help protect the workers who are being abused. So there's this fundamental change amongst a lot of religious people that before, some people would say that someone who's poor is poor because God wants them to be poor, that they didn't have the skills or education or strength to improve themselves, therefore that's what they get. That's all going to change and go out the window. Now it's going to be that workers should be protected, that it's God's belief, it's a moral belief that we should protect them. And they're going to advocate for things that would help improve society in their minds, such as getting rid of child labor. It's immoral for us to make kids work like this, to help protect workers. It's immoral to have unsafe conditions for workers. They also believed that alcohol needed to be removed from society because men at home were beating their wives, were committing suicide, were beating their kids, and a lot of them hated their life because of how brutal their job was, their work was. So they would go drink and then take out their frustrations on their family. So they believed that alcohol needed to be removed from society. And then there's this other group of people, which the progressives are going to get their ideas from and are actually going to merge with, which we call the Muckrakers. Now, the Muckrakers are these investigative journalists, these authors that write books and articles. They're reporters who are going to find lots of the problems in society and report on them, investigate them, write about them in newspapers, write about them in books. And they're going to clearly expose these problems so everyone can see, hey, this is a big problem. Hey, monopolies are stealing all this money. Political machines are illegally taking kickbacks off of your taxpayer money, off of your hardworking money. And once people see these problems, they're going to demand change. And we'll look at that more in a second. So this is what helps grow this tree of the progressive movement, helps make it into what it is. And we'll talk more about what it is as we go through the unit. So let's look at muckrakers a little more. So again, a muckraker, they're just these investigative reporters, these investigative journalists, and they write books, they write articles that expose these problems. That's the most important part right there. Once they expose these problems, the people read about these problems, they hear about these problems, everyone talks about these problems, and it spreads really quickly, and people start saying, you know what? Let's demand change. Let's say, hey, government, go in there and fix these problems. Let's look at a few examples of that. So there's this specific muckraker. Again, this is a title, not necessarily a title, but what we call some people. Just think of a muckraker as a reporter. So there's this famous reporter, this famous muckraker called Upton Sinclair. And he's going to write this famous book called The Jungle. If you're in 11th grade, you might be reading that this year. So this book is going to expose one of those problems. Remember, muckrakers write books to expose problems. The problem that exposed is all the bad, terrible things that are happening to workers and in the meatpacking industry. And let's look at a few things that are descriptively detailed in his book. So the people that are, putting the meat in that are packing the meat and getting ready to ship out to the stores and slaughterhouses, and they're in the slaughterhouse for people to buy, they're going to find that, the people there are exhausted. They're working in poorly lit areas, and they're tired. And as a result, they're, if you're cutting meat all day, sometimes you might cut yourself, and that causes your own blood to mix in with the blood and the meat that you're already cutting, and that blood's getting in the meat, and people's fingers are getting cut off, little pieces of it, not huge fingers, and then that's going in the meat. And nobody's saying, there's no safety inspections. Remember, the government's laissez-faire, they're hands off. They're not looking at businesses and telling them what to do. They're very hands off. So businesses could kind of do what they want. So people are cutting themselves and little pieces of fingers are getting the meat, and no one's telling them to throw that stuff away or, wash your hands, clean up, you're done for the day. None of that. That finger, that blood, it's mixing in with the meat. Upton Sinclair's going to expose. He's going to find that people aren't washing their hands before they go to work. So whatever they've been touching, if they're sick, all that stuff's getting in with the meat. A lot of meat falls on the floor, and guess what? It's picked right up and it's packed like the rest of it. And there's rats in it. There's rats running around this meat, and rat poop is mixed in with this meat, and it's being all packed together, cooked together, it's being sent out. So Upton Sinclair exposes that all this chicken, beef, pork, whatever it is that people are eating has all these dirty contaminants in it, and there's much more. Let's look at a quote from his book. Again, the book's called The Jungle. He says, "There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of dried dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then the rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together." Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. So, that's disgusting, right? So, if you were someone living back then, you would probably read this problem, and this book was successful in exposing this problem. You read about it, you heard about it from someone who did read it, you read about it in the newspaper that reported on the book, and then you demand change. You do not want to keep eating beef that's full of rat poop or sawdust that's been contaminated, has poison bread in it, whatever. And then you say, government, you need to regulate this. You need to put rules on it. You need to make sure our food's safe and clean and healthy to eat. So this is a pushback against laissez-faire. The government for too long has been saying, wear hands off. Businesses will be businesses. And now we're going to say, let's get involved and fix this problem. Government, get involved. Fix the problem. Reform it. Get more hands-on. Let's look at a few more muckrakers. Some other famous muckrakers. Of course, we had Upton Sinclair with the meatpacking industry. There was a man named Frank Norris who wrote a book called The Octopus, which is going to expose how the railroad industry was abusing farmers, which led to that populist movement, the populist party that we talked about. Jacob Riis exposed how the poor people in the cities, the urban poor, and how they were hurting, and exposed how crowded those tenement homes were, those packed apartment buildings that were hot, sweaty, and unsafe, and very vulnerable to be burned down if there was ever a fire, killing lots of people. This woman named Ida Tarbell is going to write a book about the history of the Standard Oil Company. As you may remember, Standard Oil was a company by John D. Rockefeller, the richest person in the world, and she exposed his robber baron tactics, the way he treated workers, how terrible workers were being treated, and how he had a monopoly, which was ruthlessly eliminating competition and causing prices to go up. And Lincoln Steffens wrote a book called The Shame of the Cities, which exposes how political machines were stealing money from the taxpayers through kickbacks. So these are all those problems we've been talking about during the Gilded Age. And now the muckrakers, those investigative reporters that are writing books and articles, are exposing these problems. So people will demand change to fix these things and make society better. So here we are back at our tree. Let's look at a few things that they're going to work on. This isn't everything. There's a bunch more, but let's just look at a few. So the progressives, with all their roots, their muckrakers, their social gospel movement, their ideas from the populist party, are going to try to fight for the woman's right to vote. They're going to try to protect workers' rights, try to get rid of alcohol in society, help protect the environment and our natural resources, help break up our big businesses, those monopolies and trusts like Carnegie's Steel Company, like Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. They want to protect the food and keep people healthy after reading books like The Jungle from Upton Sinclair. And there's a lot more, and we'll look at those reforms on our next video. All right, well, that's it, everybody. Hope you learned something about the progressives. Thanks a lot.